Hey guys, today we are going to be doing different expressions of eyes. You're going to need a pencil, your paper blender, your eraser, and pencil sharpener potentially. So we are going to start with what I like to call the rage eye because it looks like someone who is enraged. And we are going to start with the iris, the circle in the middle of our eye, and the top of the eye. Notice how it's angled down on the inner side and rounded out on the top. Then for the eyebrow, it's going to pretty much touch the top of the eye at a really harsh angle, and then the end of the eyebrow is going to curl down. That's going to make it look like that muscle of the eyebrow is really engaged. The bottom of the eye is basically going to touch the bottom of the iris, but make sure the top of the eye has that space above the iris because our enraged person is going to have wider eyes. We also kind of want to outline that bottom sphere of the eyeball itself that's underneath the skin and imply where the little crinkled nose is going to be. That squiggly line is like the crinkled nose of our really enraged person. Now it's time for shading. So I like to start at the darkest part of the iris there, the pupil within the iris, and leave a space for the little highlighted part. Make sure you don't color over top of it. That way you have a reflection in the eye. I have a pretty chunky eraser, so I have a hard time getting my details erased, but hopefully you have a smaller eraser with you. Alright, now's the time to start adding your shading. I had quite a lot of pigment still left on my paper blender, so some of that's coming from that, but you need to go in and darken the areas that you want darkened. I put the kind of beginnings of some eyelashes in there, but I did go ahead and blend those out and add some more. Don't forget on the bottom layer, the bottom eyelid, you need to have a little white space in between the edge of the eyelid and where the eyelashes start, and you'll see that as I come in here in just a minute. Consider which direction the hair is going to grow within the eyebrow and follow that shape that we had kind of mapped out already, and then you can blend that out just a little bit to make it look nice and dark. Go ahead and add in the tear duct if you haven't already. Remember, our eye is a sphere, so that's kind of where that comes in. On mine, I wanted mine to look a little bit more angry and a little less shocked, so I brought the curve of the eyebrow down a little bit more. See how that changed it? A lot of times on these expressions, little tiny changes, little angles, make a big difference in the expressiveness or what emotion we're capturing in the eye. When I took a closer look at my eye, I noticed that the iris itself was probably too small, so I went ahead and erased mine and restarted that. Wanted it to fit the actual eyeball that I'm working with, and I think it turned out a lot better. Another way to change the expression is just to change the direction of the eye, like which way it's looking. So keep that in mind as you're working on drawing people. A lot of the examples I'm going to give today are looking straight at us, and a lot of times that's what we find most natural to draw. but that's not always what you're going to need to do for your artwork. So keep that in mind as you play with expressions. And with some final touches, that'll make up our rage eye. So I did lift it up to the camera and it loses a little bit of focus, so I apologize for that. But that is going to be your completed rage eye. Next, we're going to stick in the same family of emotions and do anger. This one, we need the top eyelid to come into the iris a bit because the eyes are narrowed in this particular angry expression. So think about if someone's angry, they're going to have their eyebrows a little bit furrowed. So their eyebrows need to kind of come up to where that, or come down to where that upper lid is. And it's going to be really low to the eye like that. You can play around with the eyebrow shape. Mine started off a little bit too short and then I had to adjust it. And then adjusting the shape of the tear duct and the bottom of the eye. Now we are going to need the crease of the eyebrow to extend up into the skin. So when it's really furrowed like that, we're going to have that crease most of the time. Every face is a little bit different. And then of course do your shading, leave the highlight as you normally would. I meant to mention this on the first one, but make sure you're always doing the shading on the left and right side of the eyeball because it's a sphere, right? It's a ball in our face and it needs to have that shading. You never stop using the shading that you use for forms. And this is a form within our face and it needs shading on the left and right to make it look round. The skin on the corner of the eye where it meets the nose is going to be a little bit crinkled, so make sure you're adding that in there, and we're going to shade that out in a little bit with the pencil blender. And of course, again, the bottom of the sphere underneath our eye, we're going to use that shading as well. One of the muscles in your face are tense, so that becomes more pronounced, so that's important for us to capture that rounded part underneath. And then again, leave that little white space on the bottom lid for the bottom eyelashes to come out of. And that finalizes our angry eye. On to a new emotion. Next, we're going to be doing a very much terrified eye. Not just scared, but terrified or shocked. Shocked has a lot of the same facial structures as this really scared eye that we're about to do. So we have the space again above the iris because our eyes are open wide, so we want to have that space. And then it's touching, the bottom lid is touching the bottom of the eye. And just like on the other eyes we did, we're going to make sure we're capturing the spherical nature of the eye. So we're going to round it out near the tear duct and do the little space underneath, the little rounded line underneath to kind of imply that sphere underneath our skin. The shape of your eyebrow can really make or break the expression that you're trying to create. So in this particular one, we've got an eyebrow that's really high up on the face and arched. So make sure we're capturing that shape there. And then start adding your shading. I'm going to point it out again because it's really important. Notice the difference it's going to make when we add the shading on the inner side of the eye and the outside of the eye. Now it actually looks like a sphere. And there's our shocked and or terrified eye. The next eye we're going to do, or next expression, is going to be one of concern. So again, a little bit more muted of a similar emotion. Start with your iris, just like we have on all the other ones. And you'll notice that this is a slightly more closed eye. We don't get so much white space above the iris or below it either. So we're going to shape out our eye, make sure you're including the tear duct. Mine looked a little bit like a lemon, so I had to fix that. With the concerned eye, we're going to have this little crease in between the eyebrow and the eye because we're kind of furrowing our brows a little bit, but it's not quite as much as the angry one. So we're getting that fold, and we actually get to see it this time because the eyebrow's not all the way down to the eye. And then for the concerned eyebrow, see how it makes that little dip over the eyebrow bone? It dips down up right above the eye and then goes up over the eyebrow bone. We are going to take some time now for just a regular happy eye. This is a little bit different. It's got some slight differences to just the eye at the resting face. It's going to be a little bit squintier, which means the top and the bottom are going to come in over the iris a little bit. I'm making my pupil a little bigger because typically when we're looking at something we like, something that makes us happy, our pupils are going to expand. And you'll see at the very end, I had to shape out the bottom of the eye a little bit because if you're thinking about someone smiling, their cheeks lift, which pushes the skin a little bit flatter or a little bit higher underneath the eyeball. So like at the bottom eyelid. And I'll do that at the very end of the video. I had to go back and fix that. But the eyebrow is going to be, again, at the normal resting position. But we're going to need to push the skin underneath the eye a little bit higher, so we're not going to see as much of the spherical nature of the eyeball itself, as much as that little skin underneath the eye is just going to create that little bit of a wrinkle right there. Here's where I come in and I flatten the under part of the eyelid a little bit. You can see it almost bulges upward a little bit like a rainbow. Same thing for that little skin underneath, and that helps a little bit. If this were a full face, you would see that more. You would see the skin pushing up and it would match with the eyes. I also wanted to add a little bit bigger of a wrinkle above the eye for the upper eyelid. And last but not least, we are going to do a sad eye, which is actually very, very similar to the concerned eye that we did before. But we're going to try and add a teardrop in this one. And you wouldn't necessarily need to draw a teardrop every time you did a sad eye. It wouldn't always have to be crying. But in this one I am. And you'll see I moved over the iris and pupil to the right so it wasn't looking directly at us as the viewer. But I did start off with it in the center to help get the shape of my eye because that's just what I'm more practiced with drawing. For the teardrop itself, the way you want to make it look like water is by having really sharp highlights. I had some trouble with this because I didn't have my pencil sharp enough, and I have a chunky eraser instead of a fine detail eraser, and that's just based on what I had at my house. But I will show you the shading that I ended up with, as well as kind of more like what it should have been on a little bit bigger scale.